the way in which he reads Saussure, the signifier, the big signifier, over the signified, the little rather insignificant signified, because after all, what does the signified matter? You can never cross the bar, right, to get to it. You are barred from it. This is actually quite different from Saussure's signified over the signifier, anchored by a kind of mutuality whereby it's never a question what generates what. But as to what produces what, Saussure is agnostic about it, and Lacan insists that the big S is that which generates the signified, that from which any possibility of grasping a signified arises and derives. What then is desire? Well, perhaps we've covered it. It is the endless deferral of that which cannot be signified in the metonymic movement of discourse, or of the way in which the unconscious functions. And Lacan is very ingenious in showing, I think convincingly showing us, how it is that we get from one signifier to another. In other words, how what he calls the chain of the signifier works. You have a series of concentric rings, but each concentric ring is made up of a lot of little concentric rings which hook on to associated surrounding signifiers in ways that could be variable. This, I think, very nicely re-diagrams Saussure's sense of the associative structure of the vertical axis, that is to say, of the synchronic moment of language, the way in which some signifiers naturally cluster with other signifiers, and not just one group of signifiers, but a variety of groups of signifiers, but don't at all naturally cluster with just any or all signifiers, so that you get associative clusters in the axis of selection, and they are indicated by this. And as the chain of signifiers unfolds, the one or another of these possible associations links on. And remember, all of these signifiers are made up in turn of a chain of concentric circles. So I think this is a rather good way of understanding the unfolding of metonymy. Now, every once in a while, you get metaphor. Whoa! And it's a moment to be celebrated in Lacan, because it's, as he says, poetic. There is a gathering together of signifiers and ultimately a substitution of one signifier for another in such a way that one says, aha, I see it. I can't grasp it. I can't have it. But I see it. I see the object of desire. I see what has been displaced by the very act of signification. That's what he calls metaphor, and he sees metaphor as appearing at these points de capiton. Think of this as a quilt. Think of this as quilting buttons, right? That's what a quilt is like. It's filled with something, and then the stuffing is held in place by buttons, right? So the stuffing of metonymic signification is held in place usefully for the analyst, for the reader, for the interpreter by these quilting buttons or points de capiton. And so the example that that Lacan gives is, as I say, he gives several examples. There are the wonderful, dazzling readings, both of 4 lines from Valéry and of the 1 line from Victor Hugo. I focus on the Hugo because it's a little easier, just the 1 line. He says, there is something that happens in this line which is metaphoric. And I'm delighted that he uses the word sparks. In other words, the metaphoric, the presence of the metaphor is a spark. Remember I was talking about in Wolfgang Iser the need to gap a spark plug, in other words, the need to have a certain distance between 2 points in order for the spark to happen. If it's too close, it doesn't happen. You just short out. And if it's too distant, it doesn't happen because the distance is too great. The appearance of metaphor on the axis of combination, the way in which we can identify these quilting buttons on the axis of combination is nothing other than what Jakobson said and meant when he said the poetic function is the transference of the principle of equivalence from the axis of selection to the axis of combination. All right, now, Lacan says language is a rebus, as I've said, and he says the movement of the signifier is the movement of desire, and the most obvious consequence is, and this isn't the first time or last time that we will have encountered this in various vocabularies and contexts, is that language thinks me. That is to say, that which brings my thinking into being is not present to me. I am not present to myself. I cannot be present to myself, because what is present is the way in which myself comes into being in discourse which cannot identify me.